My name is Daniel Harmon, and for 43 years I have lived on the same 20 acres that my grandfather purchased back in 1952. Our family farm sits just outside the city limits of Pinewood, Oregon, close enough to civilization for convenience, but far enough away to enjoy the quiet rhythms of rural life. The land has supported 3 generations of Harmons through good harvests and bad, through economic downturns and prosperous times. We have never been wealthy by city standards, but the land provides what we need. My days follow the natural patterns of the seasons. I wake before sunrise. I tend to my small herd of cattle. I maintain the vegetable garden that supplies most of my produce. I repair fences, maintain equipment, and keep everything in working order. It is not an extravagant existence, but it is honest, and it is mine. Or at least, it was until Pinewood Heights arrived. The first sign of trouble came 2 years ago when bulldozers began clearing the forest half a mile down the road. The developer called it luxury country living. 3-bedroom homes packed onto quarter-acre lots with manicured lawns and identical mailboxes. I did not pay much attention at first. The city had been expanding for years, and it was only a matter of time before development reached this far out. I minded my business, and for the first few months everything remained peaceful. That changed the day Richard Danworth, Rick to his friends, though I would never count myself among them, moved into the largest house in the new development. He drove a black SUV with DANWORTH vanity plates and wore polo shirts tucked into pressed khakis even when checking his mail. Within a month, he had been elected president of the Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association. The first note appeared on my fence post on a Tuesday morning. I found it while doing my rounds, printed on expensive cardstock with the Pinewood Heights HOA letterhead. Notice of landscaping violation, it read in bold letters. Your property fails to meet the minimum standards set forth in Section 7.3 of the HOA bylaws. Please remedy within 14 days to avoid further action. I crumpled the paper and tossed it into my truck. It had to be a mistake. My farm predated their development by decades. I was not part of their association and had never signed any agreement. I did not give it another thought until the second notice arrived a week later, this one in a sealed envelope marked urgent. Final warning before enforcement action, this one threatened. Multiple violations of HOA regulations have been documented. This time, I did not throw it away. Something about the tone made my stomach tighten. I called the number listed at the bottom of the page. Pinewood Heights HOA, this is Rick speaking. The voice on the other end sounded smug, as if he had been waiting for my call. This is Daniel Harmon. You have been leaving notices on my property about supposed violations. There must be some mistake. My farm is not part of your development. The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to be deliberate. No mistake, Mr. Harmon. Your property falls within our jurisdiction according to the new municipal zoning agreement. Your farm is affecting property values in our community. The board has received numerous complaints. I took a deep breath. I have lived here for over 40 years. My land is not part of your HOA. I never signed any agreement with you. That is irrelevant, Rick replied, his voice hardening. The expansion agreement filed with the county includes adjacent properties in the community interest zone. You will comply with our standards, or we will be forced to take more direct measures. 2 days later, I spotted Rick walking along my eastern fence line, taking photographs and making notes on a clipboard. I approached him calmly, determined to resolve whatever misunderstanding had occurred. You are trespassing, I said, keeping my voice level. This is private property. Rick did not even look up from his clipboard. I am conducting an official inspection of violations affecting the Pinewood Heights community. Your weed problem is out of control, your outbuildings are unsightly, and that tractor has been parked in the same spot for weeks. All violations of Section 7.3, 8.1, and 12.4. Listen carefully, I said, stepping closer. My farm is not under your authority. These are not weeds. This is native grassland. Those outbuildings have stood for 50 years, and that tractor moves every day because I use it to work my land. Rick finally looked up, his eyes narrowing as he assessed me. He was shorter than I was, but he carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to having his way. Everyone thinks the rules do not apply to them, Mr. Harmon, but no one is above the HOA. You will find that out soon enough. As he walked away, I stood watching him, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. This was not just a misunderstanding. This was a power play, and Rick Danworth had just declared war on my way of life. The harassment escalated with alarming speed. One morning, I found an official-looking document taped to my mailbox, complete with gold seals and legal jargon. Notice of impending lien, read the header, claiming I owed $2,450 in unpaid HOA dues and violation fees. The document threatened legal action if payment was not received within 30 days. I drove to the county clerk's office that same afternoon. The clerk, a kindly woman named Margaret who had known my family for years, scanned the document and shook her head. "This is not a legal filing, Daniel. No lien has been recorded against your property. This appears to be intimidation, pure and simple." Margaret's words brought temporary relief, but when I returned home, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. 4 high-definition security cameras had been installed on HOA property across from my eastern fence line, all pointed directly at my house and barn. A small sign beneath them read, "Community Security Monitoring, Pinewood Heights HOA." The next day, I received a visit from Jacob Miller, an elderly man who lived on the edge of the new development. His hands trembled as he stood on my porch, refusing to come inside. "I thought you should know," he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Rick did the same thing to the Hendersons last year. Their property was just inside city limits, but they had that big workshop that Rick said violated the aesthetic standards. They fought him for 6 months. Then their insurance rates mysteriously tripled, and they could not get contractors to work on their house. They sold to a developer and moved away." "I appreciate the warning," I told him, "but I am not selling. This land is all I have." Jacob's eyes filled with sympathy. "Everyone has a breaking point, son. Rick knows how to find it." That night, something spooked my cattle. I woke to their panicked lowing and rushed outside to find the fence wire cut in 3 places. The animals were scattered but unhurt. As I worked to round them up in the pre-dawn darkness, I caught a flash of movement near the tree line, a figure retreating toward the development. By the time I secured the last animal, the sun was rising and I was exhausted. The pattern continued for weeks. Tools disappeared from my barn. Strange noises disturbed my livestock at night. My truck tires were slashed, though I could not prove who did it. And all the while, those cameras watched, recording my every move. When I confronted Rick at the community mailboxes one afternoon, his demeanor had changed. The pretense of professionalism was gone, replaced by open hostility. "Having some problems with your farm, Harmon?" he asked, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "You know exactly what is happening," I replied, "and it stops now." Rick stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. "You are living on borrowed time. That eyesore you call a farm is dragging down property values for everyone. The HOA protects its investments, one way or another." An audience had gathered, other homeowners collecting their mail, watching our confrontation with uncomfortable expressions. "That man," Rick announced loudly, pointing at me, "is squatting on land that should be developed for the community. He refuses to abide by our standards and threatens our property values. And I have concerns about his stability. I have seen him walking his property line at night with what appeared to be a weapon." The lie was so bold, so brazen, that for a moment I could not speak. By the time I found my voice, the damage was done. People were staring at me with suspicion, with fear. That evening, I filed a report with the county sheriff. Deputy Collins listened patiently to my story, looking through the photographs I had taken of the cut fences, the cameras, the false documents. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Harmon," he said finally, "but this falls under civil matters. Without evidence connecting Mr. Danworth directly to property damage or explicit threats, my hands are tied." "He is trying to drive me off my land," I insisted. Deputy Collins sighed. "Document everything, get a lawyer, and maybe. Consider if this fight is worth it. Men like Danworth, they have connections, resources. They usually get their way in the end." As I drove home in silence, I realized how alone I truly was. The law would not help me. The community feared Rick, and every day the pressure grew more intense. But this land was all I had left of my family's legacy, and I was not going to surrender it without a fight. The morning mail brought a new form of attack. The envelope bore the letterhead of Lancaster, Finch and Associates, attorneys at law, and contained a formal cease and desist letter demanding I halt all agricultural operations in violation of residential zoning ordinances. The document threatened litigation that would cost me substantial financial penalties and possible criminal charges. I spent that afternoon calling every lawyer in the phone book. After the fifth firm refused to take my case due to conflicts of interest with the development company behind Pinewood Heights, I began to understand the depth of Rick's influence in our small community. The few attorneys willing to speak with me quoted retainer fees far beyond my means. One honest soul admitted, "I cannot afford to make an enemy of Westland Development. They control too much business in this county." While I fought paper battles, Rick launched a public campaign against me. Flyers appeared throughout Pinewood and neighboring communities. Illegal farming operation threatens local safety and property values. The flyers featured unflattering photographs of my property taken from unfavorable angles, with close-ups of equipment that was described as dangerous and unsightly. The damage spread quickly. My regular feed supplier called to say he could no longer deliver to my property. "Got pressure from some important customers," he explained apologetically. "Nothing personal, Daniel, but I cannot afford the backlash." The mechanic who had serviced my tractor for 15 years suddenly had no openings in his schedule. The local farmers market where I sold my produce informed me that my vendor application had been denied due to health concerns. Some neighbors I had known for decades began to avoid me. Others believed the rumors that I was operating illegally or that my property was contaminating the groundwater. A few reached out in secret to express support, but none would do so publicly. Rick's reputation for retaliation kept them silent. Desperate for answers, I spent a full day at the county records office, digging through zoning maps and property documents. Late in the afternoon, buried in a file of historical zoning decisions, I found it, the definitive proof I needed. A county commissioner's ruling from 1997 had explicitly exempted my property from city annexation due to its historical agricultural status. The document included language that permanently protected the land from future rezoning without owner consent. I made copies of everything and drove straight to Rick's house, determined to end this nightmare with cold, hard facts. I found him watering his immaculate front lawn, his back turned to me. "I have proof," I announced, holding out the documents. "Official county records showing my farm is permanently exempt from city zoning and any HOA jurisdiction. This has to stop now." Rick casually turned off the water and examined the papers with exaggerated thoroughness. Then, to my astonishment, he laughed. "Convenient that you suddenly found these documents," he said, making air quotes with his fingers. "These are obviously forgeries, and even if they were real, they are outdated. The new development agreement supersedes any previous rulings." "That is not how the law works," I insisted. "You cannot simply ignore legal exemptions because they inconvenience you." Rick's expression hardened. "Let me explain something to you, Harmon. I built this community from nothing. I brought prosperity and growth to a backward area. People like you clinging to the past, refusing to progress. You are what holds this county back." He tossed the documents onto the ground between us. "This is your final warning. Comply with the HOA's expectations, or I will be forced to escalate things. And trust me, you do not want that." As I bent to retrieve my papers from the manicured grass, Rick added, "The county commissioners meet next Thursday to review zoning applications. Interesting timing, is it not?" That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by documents, photographs, and notes detailing every incident of harassment. The evidence was overwhelming, but without legal representation or official support, it meant nothing. I was a single farmer fighting an entire system that had been carefully constructed to favor men like Rick Danworth. I looked out my window at the land my grandfather had worked, that my father had preserved, that had sustained me my entire life. The moon cast long shadows across the fields, and in the distance, the lights of Pinewood Heights glowed like an advancing army. I was being erased from my own land, not by force, but by paperwork and politics and fear. But I had found the one thing Rick could not forge or manipulate, the legal protection for my property. Now I just needed someone with the courage to help me use it. The county zoning office was housed in a squat brick building that had not changed since my childhood. Inside, I asked to speak with someone about historical zoning exemptions. After a 30-minute wait, I was directed to Barbara Phillips, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses. "I remember this case," she said, examining the documents I had found. "Your father was quite insistent about maintaining the agricultural designation. Let me pull the digital records to confirm." 20 minutes later, she handed me an official letter confirming the permanent exemption status of my property. "This is legally binding, Mr. Harmon. Your land cannot be rezoned without your explicit consent, regardless of surrounding development." Armed with official verification, I decided to make one final attempt at a peaceful resolution. I called Rick and proposed a meeting on neutral ground, the local diner where the farmers gathered each morning. To my surprise, he agreed. The next morning, I arrived early, documents organized in a folder, prepared to end this conflict professionally. Rick arrived 15 minutes late, flanked by two men in business suits. He did not introduce them. "I have official confirmation from the county," I began, sliding the folder across the table. "My property is permanently exempt from rezoning. It cannot be incorporated into your HOA jurisdiction. I would appreciate it if you would remove the cameras facing my property and retract the false statements you have been spreading about my farm." Rick glanced at the documents without touching them. One of his companions whispered something in his ear. "These documents appear to have been altered," Rick announced loudly enough for nearby diners to hear. "The original exemption was conditional and expired in 2010. Our legal team has already confirmed this with the county commissioners." "That is a lie," I said evenly. "I just met with Barbara Phillips at the zoning office yesterday." At this, something flickered across Rick's face, surprise quickly masked by anger. He stood abruptly. "Barbara Phillips is a clerical assistant with no authority to interpret zoning law. The commissioners have already scheduled a vote on rezoning the entire area, including your property. This matter is closed." As they left, the diner fell silent, all eyes on me. I sat there, humiliation burning in my chest, but also a growing certainty that Rick had not known about my exemption. His reaction had betrayed him. Whatever game he was playing, I had just introduced a wild card. 3 days later, I was repairing my tractor when movement caught my eye. Rick was walking along my fence line, this time without his clipboard. Instead, he carried a shotgun, holding it casually but visibly as he surveyed my property. I approached the fence line slowly, making sure he saw me coming. "You are trespassing again, Rick, and now you are armed. I am going to have to ask you to leave." "This," he said, gesturing with the shotgun, "just protecting myself. These rural areas can be dangerous. Never know when you might encounter an aggressive animal or person." "You are on my property," I repeated. "Please leave now." "Actually," Rick said, stepping over the fence onto my land, "I am conducting an inspection of property that will soon be under HOA jurisdiction. The commissioners vote tomorrow, and I have their assurances that your outdated exemption will be overturned." My heart pounded as he walked further onto my land. "I am asking you once more to leave. This is private property." Rick's expression darkened. "I warned you what would happen if you kept disrespecting my authority." He raised the shotgun slightly, not pointing it directly at me, but close enough to make his threat clear. "I do not respond well to being challenged, Harmon." I stood my ground, though my mouth had gone dry. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone. "I am calling the sheriff, and I am recording this." "Go ahead," Rick sneered. "By the time they arrive, I will be gone, and it will be your word against mine. Who do you think they will believe? the respected HOA president or the unstable farmer who has been causing problems. Nevertheless, I dialed and put the phone to my ear, never taking my eyes off Rick and his shotgun. He held his position for a moment longer, then spat on the ground and turned away. "This ends tomorrow," he called over his shoulder. "One way or another." True to Rick's prediction, by the time Deputy Collins arrived, there was no sign of him or the shotgun. I showed the deputy the footage I had managed to capture on my phone, Rick trespassing, though the threat with the shotgun had occurred just out of frame. "I understand your concern," Deputy Collins said, "but without clear evidence of the threat, this is still trespassing at most, a misdemeanor. I will file the report, but—" He trailed off, the implication clear. Nothing would come of it. "What about a restraining order?" I asked. "You can try," he replied, "but without documented threats or evidence of harm, it is unlikely to be granted." That night, I drove to the county courthouse and filed for an emergency protective order. The clerk took my paperwork with a sympathetic expression that told me everything I needed to know. Without blood spilled, there would be no protection. As I drove home in the gathering darkness, I knew I had reached a crossroads. The system had failed me. The authorities would not act until it was too late. If I wanted justice, if I wanted to protect what was mine, I would have to find another way. That night, I made a decision. If the system would not protect me, I would build my own case so undeniable that it could not be ignored. I purchased a digital camera with night vision capabilities and installed my own surveillance system covering every approach to my property. I began keeping meticulous records, dates, times, photographs, and detailed descriptions of every incident, no matter how small. I created a timeline of harassment dating back to Rick's first appearance on my property. I documented every false claim, every act of vandalism, every threatening encounter. What had once seemed like isolated incidents now formed a clear pattern of escalating intimidation. Through a farming equipment forum online, I connected with Thomas Reynolds, a retired orchard owner from the next county who had experienced similar HOA harassment 3 years earlier. "They tried the same tactics with me," Thomas explained when we met for coffee. "False claims of jurisdiction, intimidation, community pressure. But I had an advantage they did not expect. My daughter is an attorney in Portland specializing in property rights." Thomas gave me his daughter's business card. "Sarah does not fear local politics, and she has taken down HOAs before." Sarah Reynolds agreed to meet me the following week. She reviewed my documentation with professional interest, occasionally making notes or asking for clarification. When I finished my story, she leaned back in her chair with a slight smile. "You have done the work most clients never do," she said. "This is extensive documentation of systematic harassment, but we need more. We need to demonstrate that Mr. Danworth is not just a bully, but that he is abusing his position within the HOA structure." "How do we do that?" I asked. "Follow the money," Sarah replied. HOAs collect dues, maintain financial records, and have fiduciary responsibilities to their members. If Mr. Danworth is the type of person who would threaten a farmer with a shotgun, I doubt he is diligent about keeping HOA funds and personal expenses separate. With Sarah's guidance, I filed a formal complaint with the state's Office of HOA Oversight, requesting an audit of the Pinewood Heights HOA financial records. The process would take time, but it was a start. Meanwhile, I continued building my case. I installed better cameras and motion sensors. I documented every encounter with Rick or his associates. I even began carrying a small voice recorder whenever I left my house. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected visitor. Martin Chen had moved to Pinewood Heights 6 months earlier and served as the HOA's treasurer. He stood nervously on my porch, refusing to come inside or give his name. "I cannot be seen here," he said, handing me a small flash drive. "But what is happening to you is wrong. Rick has gone too far this time." Before I could ask questions, he hurried back to his car and drove away. That evening, I plugged the flash drive into my computer and discovered a trove of damning evidence. Financial records showing HOA funds being diverted to personal accounts. emails discussing how to force undesirable elements out of neighboring properties. And most shocking of all, security footage from the HOA office showing Rick bragging about his plan to drive me off my land so the development company could purchase it below market value. "The old man will break," Rick's voice came clearly through the computer speakers. "Everyone has a price or a breaking point. We just need to find Harmon's." With this evidence in hand, Sarah advised me to take one more step, confronting Rick directly while recording the encounter. "Give him a chance to back down," she suggested. "His response will tell us everything we need to know." The next day, I approached Rick as he supervised landscape workers at the HOA Community Center. "I know about the financial irregularities," I said calmly, "and I have evidence of your harassment campaign. This has gone far enough. Leave me and my property alone, or I will be forced to take legal action." Rick's laugh was ugly and confident. "You have nothing, and no one in this county will help you against me. Take your best shot, old man." As I walked away, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Rick's arrogance would be his undoing. The war had entered a new phase, and for the first time, I had the weapons to fight back. Sarah Reynolds did not merely file a lawsuit. She unleashed legal Armageddon. The civil complaint named not only Rick Danworth, but the entire HOA board, the development company, and the security firm that had installed cameras facing my property. The charges included harassment, intimidation, fraud, trespassing, and abuse of HOA authority. Simultaneously, she filed for an emergency injunction prohibiting any HOA representative from approaching my property or contacting me directly. Judge Wilson, known for his protection of property rights, granted the injunction within hours. "This stops now," Sarah told me as we left the courthouse. "The days of Rick Danworth acting with impunity are over." What happened next exceeded my wildest expectations. A reporter named Jessica Liang from the Pinewood Gazette caught wind of the filing and called to interview me. I directed her to Sarah, who provided copies of our evidence, including the video from the flash drive. 3 days later, the story ran on the front page. HOA president accused of harassment and financial misconduct. Rick attempted damage control, holding a press conference on his manicured lawn. "These accusations are baseless," he insisted to the assembled reporters. "Mr. Harmon is a disgruntled individual who refuses to comply with community standards. His property is an eyesore and a hazard. This lawsuit is nothing but a desperate attempt to avoid responsibility." The tide began to turn when Jessica Liang published a follow-up article featuring testimonials from other Pinewood residents who had experienced Rick's bullying tactics. Former board members came forward describing how Rick had manipulated HOA funds and abused his authority. The final blow came when Jessica obtained a copy of the security footage showing Rick's candid discussion of his plans to force me off my land. The Gazette posted the video online, and it spread rapidly through social media. Overnight, Rick Danworth became the embodiment of HOA overreach and corruption. The state's Office of HOA Oversight, spurred by the public outcry, fast-tracked their investigation. Auditors descended on the Pinewood Heights HOA office, seizing financial records and computers. Within days, they issued preliminary findings of significant financial irregularities and potential criminal misappropriation of funds. During a particularly tense court hearing, Sarah presented evidence that Rick had used HOA funds to pay for personal travel, home renovations, and even the security cameras he had installed to monitor my property. Judge Wilson's expression grew increasingly severe as the evidence mounted. "The court finds substantial evidence of systematic harassment and misuse of authority," Judge Wilson ruled. "The temporary injunction will remain in place pending full resolution of this matter." Rick sat stone-faced throughout the proceedings, but I could see the cracks in his facade. His attorney leaned over repeatedly, whispering urgently in his ear, but Rick brushed him off each time. His arrogance, the same quality that had made him believe he was untouchable, now prevented him from seeing the reality of his situation. The district attorney's office announced they were opening a criminal investigation based on the financial evidence uncovered during the audit. 2 days later, I watched from my kitchen window as sheriff's deputies arrived at Rick's house with arrest warrants. The charges included embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, filing false documents, and criminal intimidation under state law. Local news cameras captured Rick being led to a patrol car in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. In that moment, I felt no joy, only a profound sense of vindication and relief that justice was finally being served. In the final judgment, Judge Wilson issued a permanent injunction preventing any HOA from claiming jurisdiction over my property. The ruling cited the historical exemption and added additional protections based on the harassment I had endured. My farm was declared legally exempt from HOA control in perpetuity, with any attempt to include it in future development plans requiring my explicit written consent. The court acknowledges the systematic harassment and intimidation suffered by the plaintiff, the ruling stated. This judgment serves not only to protect Mr. Harmon's property rights, but also to send a clear message that such abuses of power will not be tolerated in our justice system. As reporters gathered outside the courthouse seeking my reaction, I gave the simplest answer I could. All I ever wanted was to be left in peace on the land my family has worked for generations. Today, the law has confirmed what I always knew to be true. This land is mine, and no one has the right to take it from me through threats or intimidation. The winter after Rick's downfall brought the heaviest snow our county had seen in decades. From my kitchen window, I watched the pristine white blanket transform my fields into an unbroken expanse that reminded me of my childhood. The silence was profound. No cameras watching, no threatening notes, no fear of what the next day might bring. Just peace at long last. Rick's legal troubles had mounted quickly after his arrest. Faced with overwhelming evidence, he accepted a plea deal that included restitution to the HOA, community service, and a ban from serving in any HOA leadership capacity for life. He was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, a significant fall for a man who had once strutted through Pinewood Heights like a feudal lord. The remaining HOA board resigned in disgrace, replaced by a committee of residents dedicated to reform. Their first official act was to issue a formal apology to me, delivered by Elena Morales, the new president. "What happened to you was inexcusable," Elena said as we sat at my kitchen table sharing coffee. "Many of us knew things were wrong, but we were too afraid to speak up. That kind of silence makes us complicit." "Fear is a powerful weapon," I replied. "Rick understood that better than most." "We want to be good neighbors moving forward," Elena continued. "No more cameras, no more harassment, just mutual respect for our different ways of life." In the months that followed, the community began to heal. Residents from Pinewood Heights would wave when they drove past my farm. Some even stopped to purchase fresh eggs or vegetables when I set up my roadside stand in the summer. The invisible boundary between us gradually dissolved, replaced by the kind of neighborly tolerance that had defined rural communities for generations. My suppliers returned, some sheepishly offering discounts to make amends for abandoning me during the conflict. I accepted their business, but reminded them that loyalty mattered more than price in rural communities. Most understood the gentle rebuke for what it was, a necessary lesson about courage and integrity. The story of my stand against HOA tyranny spread beyond our county. I began receiving letters from other small property owners facing similar situations. With Sarah's permission, I shared her contact information with those in desperate need of legal help. For others, I offered what I had learned through hard experience. Document everything, know your rights, and never surrender to intimidation. On a crisp fall morning almost a year after Rick's arrest, I found myself drawn to the development. His house stood empty, a "for sale" sign swaying in the breeze. I parked my truck and walked to the edge of the property, remembering our confrontations, the threats, the shotgun. I felt no hatred as I stood there, only a profound sadness for a man who had mistaken control for strength, fear for respect. Rick had owned the largest house in the development, had wielded power over hundreds of people, and yet he had been empty inside. So empty that he had devoted his energy to destroying an old farmer's peace rather than building something meaningful with his own life. As I turned to leave, Elena approached from her nearby home. "We heard the bank is finalizing foreclosure next month," she said. "The development company wants to turn it into a community center." "That seems fitting," I replied. "Something positive coming from all this." Walking back to my truck, I realized how lucky I was. Despite everything Rick had put me through, I still had what mattered most: my land, my integrity, and now, a community that understood the value of both. That evening, as the sun set over fields my grandfather had tilled and my father had tended, I sat on my porch and watched the changing light paint the landscape in gold. I thought about legacy, not buildings or developments or rules carved in stone, but the quiet perseverance that allows us to stand our ground when the world tries to push us aside. My farm would outlive Rick Danworth's ambitions. It would continue producing food and sustaining life long after his name was forgotten. Because land endures when treated with respect, and rights persist when defended with courage. This simple truth had been worth every moment of the fight.